I was standing in my workshop at 7 in the morning when everything went dark. The sudden silence of my table saw winding down, cutting through the cold Arizona air like a knife. My name is Grant Ingram, and I had moved to this planned community outside of Phoenix 3 years ago because the house came with a detached workshop that was perfect for my furniture restoration business. The previous owner had run a similar operation, and everything was properly permitted and grandfathered in when the neighborhood was developed back in 2018. At least, that is what I thought until Patricia Daniels from the HOA decided otherwise. I flipped the breaker box in the workshop, but nothing happened. Walking outside, I noticed the power meter was still spinning for my main house, but the secondary meter for the workshop sat dead and motionless. That is when I saw the padlock on my electrical panel, shiny and new, with a bright orange HOA violation sticker slapped across it. The notice read in bold letters that my workshop violated residential zoning ordinances and that power would remain disconnected until I ceased all commercial operations. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA office, already knowing this was going to be a nightmare. Sunset Hills HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Her voice had that particular tone that people develop when they have just enough authority to make others miserable. This is Grant Ingram on Desert Willow Drive. Someone from the HOA just cut power to my workshop and padlocked my electrical panel. I need this resolved immediately because I have 3 client projects on deadline. Mr. Ingram, we sent you a notice 2 weeks ago about the commercial activity violation. Since you failed to respond, we took necessary action to enforce community standards. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a moment, trying to process what she just said. I never received any notice, and my workshop is grandfathered in. I have all the documentation from when I bought the house. Grandfathering expired when you sold furniture online, Mr. Ingram. That constitutes a change in business model from the previous owner's repair-only operation. The board voted unanimously to revoke your exception. You cannot just cut someone's power without proper notice and due process. This is illegal, and you know it. Patricia's voice took on an icy quality. We have every right to enforce our covenants. If you have an issue, you can request a hearing with the board. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. Until then, the power stays off. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my driveway looking at the padlock and feeling my blood pressure rising. I had rent due on my storage unit, 3 clients expecting their restored furniture by the end of the month, and now no way to use any of my power tools. My neighbor Tom walked over from his yard with his coffee mug. He was retired Air Force and had lived in Sunset Hills since the development first opened. Let me guess, Patricia? How did you know? Saw the HOA truck here at 6 this morning. Frank was with them. Frank was the maintenance guy who the HOA employed for odd jobs. They have been on a rampage lately. Got Mrs. Chen down the street for having the wrong shade of beige on her mailbox. Made the Johnsons tear out their vegetable garden because it was visible from the street. This is insane. I run a legitimate business that was approved when I bought the house. Tom shook his head. Patricia does not care about legitimate. She cares about power. Been board president for 5 years now, and it has gotten worse every year. My advice? Get a lawyer before you do anything else. I thanked Tom and went back inside, immediately searching for real estate attorneys in Phoenix who handled HOA disputes. After 3 calls, I found someone who could see me that afternoon. Rachel Morrison had been practicing HOA law for 15 years and had a reputation for not backing down. Her office was in Scottsdale, and I drove there with all my documentation in a folder. The closing papers, the previous owner's business license, the grandfather clause in the HOA bylaws, everything. Rachel was in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that immediately put me at ease. Tell me everything, she said, pulling out a legal pad. I explained the situation, showed her the documentation, and pulled up photos of the padlock panel on my phone. She studied everything carefully, occasionally making notes. This is a clear violation of Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16. They are required to provide written notice, give you an opportunity to cure the violation, and cannot shut off utilities without a court order in most circumstances. The fact that they physically locked your electrical panel is especially problematic, so what do we do? First, I am going to send them a demand letter today requiring immediate restoration of power. Second, we are going to file for a temporary restraining order and injunction. Third, we are going to request an emergency hearing with the board, not in 3 weeks. If they refuse any of this, we go to court, and they are going to lose badly. How much is this going to cost me? Rachel leaned back in her chair. HOA cases can get expensive, but I have a feeling this one will resolve quickly once they realize they screwed up. I will do the initial demand letter and emergency filing for a flat fee of $2,000. If it goes further, we will discuss it. But Grant, I have seen these power-hungry board presidents before. They bank on people being too intimidated or too broke to fight back. Once you show teeth, they usually fold. I wrote her a check and left feeling slightly better. At least I was taking action instead of just being a victim. But I still had no power, deadlines approaching, and 3 very expensive pieces of furniture sitting unfinished in my workshop. When I got home, there was another notice on my door. This one informed me that the board had also placed a lien on my property for outstanding fines related to the zoning violation. $2,000 with interest accruing daily at the maximum rate allowed by law. I called Rachel immediately. They just put a lien on my house. Of course they did. Email me a photo of the notice. This is actually going to help our case because it shows a pattern of harassment and abuse of process. I will have the demand letter out within the hour. That evening, I sat in my house trying to figure out what to do about my client projects. One was a Victorian-era desk that needed refinishing. Another was a mid-century modern credenza with water damage. And the third was a set of dining chairs that needed reupholstering. All required power tools, and my workshop was now a very expensive storage shed. My phone rang. It was my biggest client, a high-end interior designer in Scottsdale who had referred me at least a dozen customers over the past 2 years. Grant, I have been trying to reach you. My client is asking about the credenza. They want it delivered by Friday for a home staging. I have got a situation. My HOA cut power to my workshop and I am dealing with getting it restored. I might need an extension. There was a pause. Grant, I have built my reputation on reliability. I referred you because you have always delivered. If you cannot make this deadline, I need to know now so I can make other arrangements. Give me 48 hours. I am working with a lawyer and this should be resolved quickly. 48 hours. After that, I will need to find someone else and I probably would not be able to send you future work. I am sorry, but I have to protect my own business. After she hung up, I sat in the dark feeling the walls closing in. This was not just about the HOA being petty. This was my livelihood, my reputation, and my ability to pay my mortgage. The next morning, Rachel called with an update. I sent the demand letter yesterday at 5 p.m. I just got a response from the HOA's attorney. They are refusing to restore power and claiming they have absolute authority under the CC&Rs to enforce zoning restrictions. Can they do that? No, but they have a lawyer who is either incompetent or billing hours. Either way, we are filing for the emergency injunction today. I have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Can you be there? Absolutely. The hearing was in front of Judge Catherine Walsh at the Maricopa County Superior Court. Rachel had prepared a comprehensive brief outlining the violations of state law, the lack of proper notice, and the immediate harm to my business. The HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking guy in his 30s named David something, argued that the HOA had broad powers to enforce community standards. Judge Walsh was not buying it. Counselor, I have read the statutes that Ms. Morrison cited. Your client cut off power to a permitted business without providing proper notice or following required procedures. Unless you can show me case law that says an HOA can override state law, I am inclined to grant the injunction. David shuffled through his papers. Your Honor, the CC&Rs clearly state that no commercial activity is permitted in residential zones, and Mr. Ingram has provided documentation showing his business was grandfathered in. Do you have evidence that the grandfather clause was properly revoked following the procedures in your own bylaws? The board voted to revoke it. When was Mr. Ingram notified of this vote? When was he given an opportunity to be heard? David did not have an answer. Judge Walsh granted the temporary restraining order requiring immediate restoration of power, prohibited the HOA from interfering with my business pending a full hearing, and ordered the HOA to show cause why they should not be held in contempt. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I could breathe again. Rachel was grinning. That went better than expected. They will have to restore power today and the lien is suspended. We still have the full hearing in 2 weeks, but the judge clearly thinks they are in the wrong. Thank you. Seriously, you just saved my business. Do not thank me yet. We still have to deal with Patricia and her board. People like her do not like losing, and they tend to get vindictive. She was right. When I got home, there was an HOA truck parked in front of my house. Frank was there with bolt cutters, removing the padlock under the supervision of the HOA's attorney. Frank looked embarrassed and would not make eye contact. Power should be back on now, David said stiffly. But this does not mean the board is dropping the issue. We will see you at the full hearing. Looking forward to it, I said. As soon as they left, I tested the workshop power. Everything worked perfectly. I immediately got to work on the credenza, racing against the deadline. For the next 12 hours, I sanded, stained, and sealed, finally finishing at 2 in the morning. The piece looked beautiful, the water damage completely erased, and the mid-century modern lines enhanced by the new finish. I delivered it Thursday afternoon, making the Friday deadline with a day to spare. My client was thrilled and my relationship with the interior designer was preserved. But I knew this was not over. The full hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, and Rachel advised me to document everything the HOA did in the meantime. She was right to be cautious. Over the next 10 days, I received 5 separate violation notices for things like my trash cans being visible from the street 15 minutes past the allowed time, a small oil stain on my driveway, and my grass being a quarter-inch too tall according to their measurements. They are building a case that you are a problem resident, Rachel explained when I showed her the notices. It is a common tactic. They want to walk into the hearing and paint you as someone who flagrantly violates rules. Make sure you cure every single violation immediately and document that you did so. I spent my evenings pressure washing the tiny oil stain, mowing my lawn to exact specifications, and making sure my trash cans were never visible for more than the permitted time. It was exhausting and infuriating, but I did not have a choice. Then everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days before the scheduled hearing, when I woke up to angry voices outside. Looking out my window, I saw Tom and several other neighbors gathered in the street. I threw on clothes and went outside. "What is going on?" "Water is out," Tom said. "Entire neighborhood. The well pumps failed. Sunset Hills was not on city water. The development had been built with private wells and a pumping system that served the whole community. The HOA was responsible for maintaining it, which was part of what our monthly fees paid for." "How long has it been out?" "Since about 5 this morning. People are pissed. No showers, no toilets, no coffee, and nobody from the HOA is answering the phone. I tried calling the HOA office myself. It rang through to voicemail. By mid-morning, there were at least 30 residents gathered in the street, and the mood was getting ugly. Someone had gotten hold of Patricia's personal cell number, and she finally answered. "The maintenance contractor is aware of the situation and working on it." Her voice crackled over someone's speakerphone. "We will have water restored as soon as possible." "When is as soon as possible?" someone shouted. "I have kids who need to get ready for school." "I do not have an exact timeline. These things take time to diagnose and repair." "Where is Frank?" Tom asked. "He usually handles this stuff." There was a pause. "Frank is no longer employed by the HOA." The crowd erupted in angry questions, but Patricia had already hung up. Tom turned to me with a knowing look. "Frank quit last week. I saw him packing up his tools. He told me he was done dealing with Patricia's nonsense." "Who is fixing the pumps then?" That is the million-dollar question. By noon, there was still no water, and people were getting desperate. Someone organized a run to the grocery store for bottled water. Others were making plans to stay with family or friends. I filled up every container I had and started rationing. Around 2 in the afternoon, a pickup truck with Desert Solutions Well Services painted on the side pulled up to the pump house. 2 guys got out, looked around, and made some calls. One of them, a weathered guy in his 50s, walked over to our group. "Any of you know how to reach the HOA? Nobody is answering the emergency number they left on the work order." "The board president is Patricia Daniels," Tom said, "but good luck getting hold of her." The well guy sighed. "We cannot do any work without authorization. The pumps need some expensive parts and the electrical panel needs to be completely replaced. It is about a $15,000 job." "15,000?" someone gasped. "Yeah, and that is assuming we do not find more problems once we get into it. This system has not been properly maintained in years. I can see deferred maintenance everywhere I look." He gave us his card and left, saying to have someone from the HOA call him. The neighborhood spent the rest of the day without water, making do with what we had. By evening, people were starting to panic. I was sitting in my workshop trying to focus on the Victorian desk when Tom knocked on the door. "Emergency way meeting." Patricia finally sent out a notice. 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. The clubhouse was packed when we arrived. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. Patricia sat at the head table with the other 4 board members. Karen Whitmore, the vice president, Michael Stern, the treasurer, and 2 other members whose names I could never remember. They all looked uncomfortable except for Patricia, who maintained her usual imperious expression. "Let us bring this meeting to order," Patricia said, banging a gavel. "I know everyone is concerned about the water situation." "Concerned?" someone shouted. "We have had no water for 14 hours. This is unacceptable." The board is working on resolving the issue. However, the repair costs are significant, and we need to discuss a special assessment. The room exploded. Everyone was shouting at once. Patricia banged the gavel repeatedly, but nobody was listening. "How much?" Tom's voice cut through the chaos. "The estimate is $15,000. Divided among our 87 households, that comes to approximately $172 per household." "When do you need this money?" someone asked. "Immediately. We need to authorize the repair tomorrow." "Why was not this covered by our regular HOA fees?" I asked. "We pay $300 a month. That is over $300,000 a year for this neighborhood. Where is that money going?" Patricia's eyes locked onto me. "Mr. Ingram, I am not surprised you are questioning the board's fiscal management given your ongoing legal issues with the HOA. My legal issues exist because you illegally cut my power. Do not deflect. Where is the money?" Karen Whitmore leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. Michael Stern, the treasurer, looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Our reserves were depleted by necessary legal fees defending the HOA against frivolous lawsuits, Patricia said coldly. You mean the lawsuit you are losing? I shot back. The one where a judge already ruled you violated state law? The room erupted again. Tom stood up. I want to see the financial statements. All residents have a right to review the HOA finances. I am requesting a special audit. That is not necessary, Patricia said quickly. Arizona law says otherwise, Tom replied. Title 33, Chapter 16, Section 33, 1805. Any homeowner can request financial records and you have 10 business days to provide them. I am making that request right now in front of witnesses. Patricia's face turned red. Fine, you will get your records. But that does not solve our immediate problem. We need water restored. Then use the reserve fund, someone said. There is no reserve fund. Michael finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. We spent it. The room went silent. Patricia shot Michael a look that could have melted steel. But the damage was done. What do you mean you spent it? Tom asked quietly. Legal fees, as Patricia said. We spent about $40,000 over the past 2 years on various issues. $40,000? I did the math in my head. That is more than 10% of our annual budget. What legal issues? Michael pulled out a folder. Patricia tried to stop him, but he ignored her. $12,000 to fight Mrs. Chen over her mailbox. She eventually won. $8,000 trying to force the Johnsons to remove their vegetable garden. They also won $15,000 fighting Mr. Ingram's business. We have already lost the first round and various other enforcement actions. You spent our reserve fund, which is supposed to be for emergencies like this, on petty disputes that you lost? Tom was standing now, his voice rising. And now we have an actual emergency, and we are expected to cover your incompetence with a special assessment. The room exploded again. People were shouting, some demanding Patricia resign, others threatening to sue the board themselves. Patricia tried to maintain control, but it was useless. I caught Michael after the meeting broke up. How bad is it really? He looked exhausted. We are broke. The insurance is paid through the end of the month, but after that we cannot even cover basic bills. Patricia has been pushing these enforcement actions, insisting the OA has to maintain standards, and I kept warning her we could not afford it. But she is the president, and Karen backs her on everything. What about Frank? Why did he really quit? Patricia cut his hours to save money, then blamed him when things started breaking down. He told her the well pumps needed maintenance, but she said we could not afford it. When he insisted, she accused him of trying to pad his hours and fired him. He quit before she could follow through. Walking home without streetlights because people were conserving power, I realized this was bigger than just my workshop. Patricia had driven the HOA into financial ruin through her petty tyranny, and now everyone was paying the price. The next morning, I called Rachel and explained the situation. This changes things. If the HOA is essentially bankrupt because of their actions against you and others, you might have grounds for a much bigger lawsuit. But more immediately, someone needs to fix that water system. They are asking for a special assessment, which everyone will have to pay unless someone can prove the board breached its fiduciary duty. And from what you are telling me, they absolutely did. I spent the morning making calls. The well service company confirmed they were still waiting for authorization. Patricia was not returning calls. By noon, people were getting desperate. Several families had checked into hotels. Others were hauling water from friends and family outside the neighborhood. That is when I had an idea. I called the well service company back. What if I personally guaranteed payment for the repair? There was a pause. You are talking about 15 grand, maybe more. That is a big risk. I know, but I cannot live without water, and neither can anyone else here. Can you start work today if I sign a personal guarantee? Let me talk to my boss. An hour later, the well service crew was back, and I had signed a document that made me personally liable for the entire repair bill. It was the craziest thing I had ever done, but I did not see another option. Tom came over as the crew was setting up. What did you do? Guaranteed payment. They are fixing it now. Grant, that is crazy. What if the HOA does not reimburse you? Then I will sue them. But at least we will have water. The repair took 2 days. They had to replace both pumps, rebuild the electrical panel, and fix a corroded main line that had been leaking for months. The final bill was $18,300. I nearly threw up when I signed the credit card slip, maxing out my business credit line. But that evening, water started flowing again. The neighborhood celebrated like we had just won the lottery. People were running their taps just to see it work, taking long showers, doing laundry they had been putting off. Tom organized a neighborhood meeting the next day, separate from the HOA. Over 50 residents showed up at a local park. The mood was revolution. We need to recall the entire board, Tom said. Patricia and Karen have to go, and we need to review the bylaws to see what it takes. I stood up. I just spent $18,000 fixing our water system. The HOA needs to reimburse me, and if they cannot, we need to know why. Michael said they are broke, but we need proof, the financial records, someone reminded us. Tom requested them. They have 10 days to produce them. We should also file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, another neighbor suggested. They regulate HOAs and can investigate mismanagement. Over the next week, several things happened simultaneously. Rachel filed an amended complaint in my lawsuit adding claims for breach of fiduciary duty and mismanagement. Tom pushed for the financial records, a group of neighbors filed a formal recall petition with the HOA, and someone filed a complaint with the state regulatory agency. Patricia went into bunker mode. She stopped answering the phone, stopped showing up at the HOA office, and communicated only through terse emails from the HOA's attorney. But she made a critical mistake. She sent an email to all residents claiming that the water crisis was caused by Frank's negligence, and that my unauthorized repair had voided the HOA's insurance coverage. She also claimed my lawsuit was frivolous and designed to avoid paying legitimate fines. Rachel smiled when I showed her the email. She just defamed you in writing to 87 households. This is getting better and better. The financial records arrived on day 9, delivered by a clearly unhappy Karen Whitmore. Tom and I spent an entire evening going through them with Michael, who had agreed to help us understand what we were looking at. It was worse than we thought. Patricia had spent over $60,000 in legal fees over 3 years, almost all on enforcement actions that the HOA lost. She had also authorized herself a consulting fee of $500 per month for extra administrative work, which was not mentioned in the bylaws. Karen had received similar fees. Together they had paid themselves over $36,000 over 3 years. This is embezzlement, Tom said flatly. It is at minimum a breach of fiduciary duty, Michael agreed. I voted against these fees, but I was outvoted 3-2 every time. I should have done more to stop it. Why did not you go to the homeowners, I asked. I thought about it. But Patricia convinced the board that making internal disputes public would hurt property values. I know that sounds stupid now, but she can be very persuasive. We compiled everything into a report and distributed it to every household. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. People were calling for criminal prosecution. Someone spray-painted "Re-sign" on the street in front of Patricia's house. The police were called, which turned out to be fortuitous. Officer Jessica Martinez responded to the vandalism call. While she was taking the report, several neighbors approached her with complaints about the HOA situation. She could not do anything about most of it, but when someone showed her the documentation of Patricia's self-dealing and the misuse of funds, her demeanor changed. How much money are we talking about, she asked. At least $96,000 in wasted legal fees and unauthorized payments, Tom explained. Maybe more once we do a complete audit. That is potentially theft and fraud. I need to take this back to the detective division. 2 days later, Detective Robert Chen contacted Tom, Michael, and me for interviews. We provided all our documentation, explained the timeline, and answered his questions. He was particularly interested in the consulting fees and the fact that they were never disclosed to the homeowners. In Arizona, HOA board members are considered fiduciaries. If they are taking money without proper authorization and disclosure, that is potentially theft by conversion. Depending on the amounts and intent, it could be felony charges. The detective's investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, the recall effort gained momentum. We needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall vote. We got 60%. The vote was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the clubhouse. Patricia showed up with Karen and an attorney. The other 3 board members, including Michael, had already announced they would not seek re-election and supported the recall. The meeting was tense, with Patricia insisting that everything she did was legal and in the best interests of the community. "You spent our money on petty vendettas," someone shouted. "You nearly bankrupted us." "I enforced the rules that everyone agreed to when they bought their homes," Patricia shot back. "If you do not like rules, buy property in an area without an HOA. Did the rules authorize you to pay yourself $36,000, Tom asked. "Those were legitimate consulting fees approved by the board." Michael voted against them. "That is documented. So it was you, Karen, and 2 other board members who have now resigned. And none of you disclosed these payments to the homeowners until we forced the financial records." The vote was not even close. 73 households voted to recall Patricia and Karen. 8 voted against, probably their friends. 6 abstained. They were out. A new interim board was elected that same day, with Tom as president. One of their first acts was to authorize reimbursement to me for the water system repair. The second was to hire a forensic accountant to do a complete audit. The third was to formally terminate the HOA's lawyer and retain Rachel's firm to handle our legal matters. The forensic audit took 6 weeks and cost $12,000, but it was worth it. The auditor found that Patricia and Karen had taken over $42,000 in unauthorized consulting fees over 4 years. They had also used HOA funds to pay for meals, travel, and other personal expenses they claimed were HOA-related but could not be substantiated. And they had hidden these expenses by categorizing them vaguely in the financial statements. The total misappropriation was estimated at $68,000. The wasted legal fees brought the total damage to the HOA to over $140,000. Rachel filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia and Karen personally on behalf of the HOA, seeking recovery of all misappropriated funds plus damages. Detective Chen presented his findings to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. 3 months after the water crisis, Patricia Daniels and Karen Whitmore were arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. I was in my workshop when Tom called to tell me. They took them in this morning. Both posted bail, but they are looking at serious charges. The prosecutor thinks they will plead out to avoid trial. How much time are we talking about? Depends on whether it is charged as a felony or misdemeanor. The prosecutor said probably felony given the amounts. Could be anywhere from probation to a few years. My own lawsuit was settled shortly after. The new HOA board voted to dismiss all claims against me, acknowledged that my business was properly grandfathered, and pay my legal fees. Rachel negotiated a settlement of $35,000 for the harassment, defamation, and business losses. It did not fully cover what I had been through, but it was enough. Patricia and Karen eventually pleaded guilty to felony theft. Patricia got 2 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution of $34,000. Karen got a similar sentence but with a lower restitution amount of $28,000. Both were banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The civil lawsuit took longer, but eventually we recovered most of the misappropriated funds, plus their houses ended up with liens to secure the judgments. It would take years for the HOA to fully recover financially, but at least it was on the right path. Life slowly returned to normal in Sunset Hills. The new board actually managed the community instead of ruling it like a fiefdom. They hired a new maintenance person to replace Frank, properly maintained the well system, and established transparent financial practices with quarterly reports to all homeowners. My business not only survived but thrived. The publicity from the lawsuit brought me new clients who appreciated someone who stood up to bullies. The interior designer who had almost dropped me sent me more work than ever, impressed that I had managed to meet deadlines even in the middle of a crisis. I was in my workshop about 8 months after everything had settled, putting the finishing touches on a restored craftsman-style sideboard, when Tom stopped by with beers. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing me a cold one. We sat outside the workshop, looking at the desert sunset painting the sky in oranges and purples. The streetlights came on, now properly maintained. Sprinklers activated on schedule, watering the common areas. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. "You know what the crazy thing is?" I said. "If Patricia had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. I was not bothering anyone. I paid my fees on time, followed the rules." Tom nodded. "Power corrupts. She started out probably thinking she was doing the right thing, maintaining standards. But somewhere along the way it became about control, about making people do what she wanted because she could. And the money? I think that came later. Once she realized nobody was watching, that she could do whatever she wanted as long as she had the votes. It is a common story with HOAs. That is why oversight matters." We finished our beers in comfortable silence. My phone buzzed with an email from a new client in Flagstaff. They had a whole house full of antique furniture that needed restoration and had heard about my work. It was the kind of project that could keep me busy for months. Looking back at my workshop, seeing the lights on and hearing the quiet hum of the air filtration system running, I felt grateful for everything that had happened. Not the stress or the cost or the fight, but the reminder that standing up for yourself matters. That communities are stronger when people are watching. That bullies, even ones with official titles and legal authority, can be stopped. Frank actually came back to work for the HOA a few months later, once Tom convinced him that things had changed. He told me one evening that he had known the well pumps were going to fail. He had warned Patricia repeatedly, but she had ignored him. When they finally did fail, he felt vindicated but also guilty that everyone had suffered. "I should have gone to the homeowners directly," he admitted. "But I needed the job, and I thought she would fire me if I went over her head." "She fired you anyway?" "Yeah, best thing that ever happened to me, actually. I started my own handyman business, got more work than I can handle, and I am my own boss. No more Patricia." The legal proceedings dragged on for over a year. Patricia's attorney tried various defenses, claiming the consulting fees were proper, that the board had authority to spend money as they saw fit, that the homeowners had ratified everything by not objecting sooner. None of it worked. The judge in the criminal case was particularly unsympathetic during sentencing. You held a position of trust. Homeowners relied on you to manage their community and their money responsibly. Instead, you treated the HOA as your personal piggy bank and used your authority to punish anyone who questioned you. This kind of abuse of power cannot be tolerated. Karen cried during her sentencing. Patricia remained stone-faced, never showing remorse. Her attorney made a statement afterward, claiming they were scapegoats for a dysfunctional system, and that everything they did was within their authority as board members. Nobody was buying it. The civil judgment was even more satisfying. The court found that Patricia and Karen had breached their fiduciary duties, engaged in self-dealing, and committed fraud. They were jointly and severally liable for the full amount of damages. When they could not pay immediately, the court authorized liens on their homes and garnishment of their wages. Patricia ended up selling her house in Sunset Hills and moving to a smaller place in a less expensive area. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she tried to join the HOA board at her new community and was rejected once they learned about her history. Karen divorced her husband, who had been furious about the legal mess and the financial liability. She moved out of state to live with family. The schadenfreude felt good at first, but eventually it just felt sad. These were people who had ruined their lives and hurt an entire community because they could not handle having a little bit of power. It was a waste all around. The new HOA board under Tom's leadership was everything the old one was not. They held regular meetings with open agendas. They published detailed financial reports every quarter. They created a process for homeowners to appeal violations before any enforcement action was taken. And they stopped treating every minor infraction like a federal crime. My favorite change was the new policy on home businesses. Instead of banning them outright, the board created a simple registration system. If your business did not create noise, traffic, or other disruptions, you could operate with minimal restrictions. Several other neighbors came forward with small businesses they had been running secretly, afraid of Patricia's wrath. Now everything was out in the open and properly managed. I even joined the Architectural Review Committee, helping other homeowners navigate the approval process for improvements. It felt good to be part of the solution instead of just fighting against the problem. One of the most satisfying moments came about a year after everything settled. The interior designer who had stuck with me called with a referral. Her client wanted a complete furniture restoration for a historic home they had purchased in Phoenix. Budget was essentially unlimited. It was the kind of project that could make my whole year. I told her about what you went through with your HOA, the designer said. How you fought back and won. She was impressed. Said anyone with that kind of backbone was someone she wanted to work with. The project took 4 months and involved restoring over 20 pieces of furniture, some dating back to the 1880s. It was challenging, rewarding, and profitable. When it was done, the client referred me to 3 of her friends. My business doubled in size. I hired an apprentice, a young woman named Sarah who was passionate about furniture restoration and had just graduated from a woodworking program. Teaching her the craft was deeply satisfying, passing on skills that had taken me years to develop. Tom served as HOA president for 2 years before stepping down, having stabilized the community's finances and established new governance practices. He was succeeded by a retired accountant who was even more meticulous about financial oversight. Under their leadership, Sunset Hills rebuilt its reserve fund, properly maintained its infrastructure, and became a genuinely pleasant place to live. The water system that I had paid to fix ran perfectly. The well service company I had hired came back for regular maintenance on schedule, preventing the kind of catastrophic failure that had started everything. They actually sent me a thank you card on the anniversary of the repair, acknowledging that my personal guarantee had saved the neighborhood and helped establish them as the go-to well service provider for HOAs in the area. I framed that card and hung it in my workshop, right next to the court order restoring my power and the settlement agreement. They were reminders of what I had survived and overcome. Mrs. Chen, who had been fined for her beige mailbox, invited me over for dinner one evening. She was in her 70s and had lived through similar HOA nonsense before I got involved. You gave us all courage, she said, serving me homemade dumplings. I had been thinking about selling my house just to escape Patricia, but you showed us we did not have to run, we could fight back. I did not have a choice. She was destroying my business. But you did have a choice in how you fought. You could have just paid the fines and complied. Instead, you stood up for what was right. That matters. The Johnsons, who had been forced to remove their vegetable garden, replanted it with the new board's approval. They brought me tomatoes and zucchini all summer, more than I could possibly eat. I learned to make pasta sauce from scratch and started giving jars of it to neighbors. These small kindnesses, the sense of actual community that developed after Patricia's reign of terror ended, were worth more than any legal settlement. We had been strangers living in proximity, united only by our common oppressor. Now we were neighbors who looked out for each other. There were still challenges, of course. HOAs, by their nature, create friction between individual freedom and community standards. But with reasonable people making decisions transparently, most conflicts could be resolved through conversation rather than legal action. I stayed in Sunset Hills, in the house with the workshop that had nearly destroyed my life before becoming a symbol of fighting back against petty tyranny. My business continued to grow. I bought new equipment, expanded my client base, and became known throughout the Phoenix area as the guy who restored furniture beautifully and stood up to his HOA. That reputation brought me business from other people who had fought similar battles. I restored furniture for a couple who had sued their HOA over solar panel restrictions and won. I worked with a veteran who had been fined for flying an American flag that was supposedly too large. I met people from all over Arizona who had their own Patricia Daniels stories. Each conversation reinforced that this was not just about me or even just about Sunset Hills. HOAs across the country struggled with the same problems when the wrong people gained power. But they also showed that ordinary people could fight back and win when they stood together and knew their rights. Rachel Morrison became a friend beyond just being my attorney. We would meet for coffee occasionally, and she would update me on other HOA cases she was handling. The patterns were depressingly similar. Board members who treated their position as a personal fiefdom, selective enforcement of rules, financial mismanagement, and retaliation against anyone who questioned them. Your case helped, though, she told me. I cite it regularly now. Judge Walsh's ruling established clear precedent in Arizona that HOAs cannot override state law and must follow proper procedures. It has made my job easier. That felt good, knowing that my fight had made things easier for others. The legal fees, the stress, the maxed-out credit cards, they had all purchased something valuable beyond just my own freedom. They had established that homeowners had rights and that HOA boards could not act with impunity. The story even made the local news eventually. A reporter doing an investigative piece on HOA abuse interviewed me, Tom, and several other Sunset Hills residents. The piece aired during sweeps week and apparently got strong ratings. It prompted the state legislature to consider reforms to HOA regulations, though whether anything would actually pass was anyone's guess. Patricia declined to be interviewed, which was probably smart. Her attorney issued a statement claiming she had been unfairly scapegoated and that she had always acted in good faith. The statement rang hollow given her criminal conviction and the civil judgment against her. Frank watched the news piece with me at a neighborhood barbecue Tom had organized. "You know what I remember most," he said. "The morning I cut the power to your workshop, Patricia was standing there watching, making sure I did it exactly how she wanted. She had this smile on her face. Like she was enjoying it. Power trip, absolute power trip. She told me that you had been causing problems and needed to be taught a lesson. I should have refused right then. Should have told her she was wrong, but I needed the job. You did tell her she was wrong eventually. That is why she fired you. Wish I had done it sooner, though." We watched the sunset over the desert, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends through shared adversity. Someone started a fire pit. Kids were running around playing tag. It felt like an actual community instead of just a collection of houses bound by restrictive covenants. My apprentice Sarah stopped by with her boyfriend who was interested in seeing the workshop. I gave them a tour, showing off the restored Victorian desk I was working on and explaining the techniques I used. Her boyfriend was impressed, asking intelligent questions about wood grain and finish work. "Sarah says you fought your HOA and won," he said. "That is awesome. Our apartment complex is trying to charge us for damages we did not cause. Landlord is a jerk about it. Document everything," I advised. "Take photos, keep all correspondence, know your rights under Arizona landlord-tenant law, and if it gets serious, get a lawyer early. Waiting makes everything harder." He nodded, taking mental notes. It struck me that the lessons from my fight with Patricia applied to all kinds of power imbalances. Whether it was an HOA board, a landlord, or any other authority figure, the principles were the same. Know your rights. Document everything, stand up for yourself, and do not let bullies win through intimidation. The workshop power that Patricia had cut off now ran continuously, powering tools that created beautiful furniture and supported my livelihood. The water pumps that had failed while the HOA board floundered now ran smoothly under proper maintenance. The neighborhood that had nearly torn itself apart over Patricia's abuse now thrived under competent, transparent leadership. It had cost me $18,000 to fix the water system, $3,500 in legal fees before the settlement, countless hours of stress and lost sleep, and a near miss with losing important clients. But I had gained something valuable, proof that standing up to bullies works. That communities can heal and improve when bad leaders are removed, that one person taking action can inspire others to do the same. Tom was talking about writing a book about HOA reform, using Sunset Hills as a case study. He asked if I would contribute a chapter about the legal battle. I agreed, thinking that if our experience could help other people trapped in similar situations, the whole ordeal would have been worth it. Life moved on. Seasons changed in the subtle Arizona way, where winter meant temperatures in the 60s instead of the hundreds. My business continued to grow. The neighborhood continued to improve. Patricia and Karen faded into cautionary tales we told new residents when explaining why our HOA operated the way it did. I still had moments of anger when I thought about what they had done. Cutting my power because they could, putting a lien on my house, spending the community's money on petty vendettas and paying themselves unauthorized fees. Letting the water system fail because they had driven away the one person who knew how to maintain it. But mostly I felt grateful. Grateful for Rachel's competent representation. Grateful for Tom's leadership in organizing the recall. Grateful for Michael's willingness to expose the financial mismanagement despite the personal cost. Grateful for neighbors who stood together instead of letting Patricia divide and conquer us. And grateful for the reminder that institutions are only as good as the people running them. That eternal vigilance really is the price of freedom, even in something as mundane as a homeowner association. That good people need to step up and serve in these positions, because if they do not, people like Patricia will fill the vacuum. I was finishing up the Victorian desk late one evening, applying the final coat of wax, when my phone rang. It was a reporter from a national publication doing a story on HOA abuse and reform. Someone had referred her to me as an example of successful resistance. We talked for over an hour. I told her the whole story, from the padlocked power panel to the water crisis to the criminal convictions. She was fascinated, taking detailed notes and asking insightful questions. "What would you say to other homeowners dealing with abusive HOA boards?" she asked at the end. I thought about it. Document everything. Know your rights under state law. Find a good lawyer early. Do not try to fight alone. Build coalitions with other homeowners. File complaints with state regulatory agencies. And do not give up just because they have authority on their side. Authority without accountability is tyranny, even at the HOA level. She thanked me and said the article would run in about 6 weeks. When it published, my phone started ringing with calls from homeowners across the country dealing with similar situations. I could not help them all, but I tried to point them toward resources and encourage them to fight back. Rachel's practice ended up expanding into a multi-state HOA litigation firm. She hired 3 more attorneys and support staff. My case had been a turning point for her too, establishing her reputation as someone who would take on HOA boards and win. The forensic accountant who audited Sunset Hills started specializing in HOA fraud investigations. He told me he had more work than he could handle, that HOA financial mismanagement was far more common than people realized. Most of it never came to light because homeowners did not know to look and board members protected each other. 5 years after Patricia cut my power, I was invited to speak at an Arizona state legislative hearing on HOA reform. Homeowners from across the state testified about abuse, corruption, and mismanagement in their communities. The patterns were depressingly consistent. I told the story of Sunset Hills, emphasizing how close we came to disaster and how much it cost to fix. I advocated for stronger oversight, mandatory independent audits for HOAs above a certain size, term limits for board members, and criminal penalties for financial mismanagement. Some of the reforms passed, others did not. But the conversation was happening, which was progress. HOAs could no longer operate in complete darkness, at least not in Arizona. My workshop, the one that had started everything, continued to be my sanctuary. The space where I transformed damaged, neglected pieces of furniture into beautiful, functional art. Where I taught Sarah the craft and watched her develop into a skilled artisan in her own right. The power that Patricia had cut off now ran the tools that had helped me rebuild my life and business into something stronger than before. The water crisis that her mismanagement caused had ultimately cleansed the community of corruption and established better governance. I would not wish the experience on anyone, but I would not trade it either. It had taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that communities could come together when challenged, that justice was possible when people were willing to fight for it. Every time I flipped on the power in my workshop, I remembered that morning when everything went dark. Every time I turned on a tap and water flowed, I remembered the day the pumps failed and nobody knew how to fix them. These daily mundane acts had become small celebrations of victory over pettiness and corruption. Sunset Hills was not perfect, no HOA ever would be. But it was functional, transparent, and responsive to homeowners instead of treating them as subjects to be ruled. That was worth everything it had cost to achieve. The Victorian desk I had been working on during those final reflections sold to a collector in Sedona for $8,000, my highest price ever. The client commissioned 3 more pieces. My business was more successful than I had ever imagined when I first moved to Sunset Hills. Sarah was talking about opening her own workshop eventually, maybe specializing in mid-century modern restoration. I encouraged her, offering to help however I could. Passing on knowledge and helping the next generation felt like the best possible outcome of everything I had been through. Tom finished his book on HOA reform and published it through a small press. It sold modestly but got attention in property management circles. He was invited to consult with HOAs across Arizona on best practices and governance reform. Our neighborhood's nightmare had become his second career. Frank's handyman business thrived. He hired 2 employees and bought a second truck. He told me he made more money now than he ever did working for the HOA, and he actually enjoyed his work instead of dreading it. Even Mrs. Chen found a silver lining. Her garden, which she had been afraid to maintain during Patricia's reign, became showcase-worthy. She won awards from the local horticultural society and started teaching gardening classes at the community center. These stories of resilience and recovery reminded me that communities were not defined by their worst moments but by how they responded to them. Sunset Hills had faced a crisis of leadership and corruption. We had responded by standing together, demanding accountability, and rebuilding something better. The padlock Patricia had placed on my electrical panel sat in a drawer in my workshop, a physical reminder of where this had all started. Sometimes I would take it out and look at it, remembering the anger and fear I felt that morning. Then I would look around at my thriving business, my apprentice learning the craft, and the beautiful furniture in various stages of restoration, and I would smile. Patricia had tried to shut me down. Instead, she had shut herself down and made me stronger in the process. That was probably the most poetic justice of all.